Well, thank you for tuning in. This is part one of what will be a two-part series. If you have not joined us before, we recently had some episodes of our Niger team that was famously stuck in Niger. And today I'm joined by Luke and Kate, two of our sent out ones with their family that has been serving in Myanmar for the last almost 8.5 years. So thank you guys for joining me on the Harvest podcast today.
Oh, you're welcome. It's our pleasure.
Yeah.
So you'll notice that when we did the Niger podcast episodes, there was video. That's because Niger is mostly open and there's no security risks with that. With Myanmar being a closed country, and when we say closed country, we mean places where you cannot openly be a missionary. And so when we say I'm here with Luke and Kate, that is not their actual names. That's the names that we're using to protect their identities. And to protect their partners who they have worked with there in Myanmar for the last 8.5 years. So if you have been going to Harmony Hill for a while, you probably can figure out who I'm talking to. But for those of you who can't, you can talk to us in private. We're just not putting that out here for the episode. But thank you guys for being here. Thank you for your service over the last 8.5 years. I think this is a really good opportunity to be able to talk with you guys as you prepare now to go back, not to Myanmar, but in some new things that we'll talk about later. But I want to start at the very beginning. To quote The Sound of Music, it's a very good place to start. So you all growing up, tell us a little bit about how you came to faith. How did you come to follow Jesus?
Yeah. Well, I think Kate's story begins far before mine ever does.
So I grew up here in Lufkin with my family, and I grew up going to Harmony Hill. I became a believer, a follower at a very young age, and just very faithfully discipled by my parents and then other people here at Harmony Hill. When I was, I think, 15, there was one of the missionaries that Harmony Hill was associated with, Arnold Skelton, was coming in and out of Harmony Hill. He'd come and share with us and talk about work that was going on in Africa and different things. And I know there was other missionaries that came through, and my family had there's a history of, we always had people from overseas come in our house. We had people from China and Russia, and they were always in and out. So I was around not only cross-cultural friends, but cross-cultural workers and sent out ones even at an early age. And so was very interested in hearing about what Arnold was doing. And so I remember very specifically one night during one of his talks, I think I was 15, and he was talking about some story. There was danger involved and all these other things involved. I can't remember exactly what it was, but I felt very clearly hearing or feeling the Holy Spirit saying, I want you to consider this. I want you to go to get ready to go somewhere. He didn't say where or anything. And my response as a 15-year-old was, okay, that's fine. Just please don't send me to Africa because there's snakes. This was my first response. And then very quickly I realized that's probably not the wise thing to tell Jesus, because that's probably exactly where he's going to send me, because he wants me to trust him in all things. So I said, never mind. Wherever you want, Lord, whatever you want me to do. So that was the first, I think for me, it became a personal interest, and just becoming aware that this could be something that the Lord might have me do in the future. And so I told my parents and told other mentors here at Harmony Hill, and started going on trips with my dad, and then in college with different college ministries and things like that. And it's from that time being able to see the Lord just lead me to the next step, to the next place, to the next trip. And on each trip, just to see the things that the Lord wanted to teach me step by step. It wasn't I call you today and you're going to go tomorrow. He had things he wanted me to learn, and he had things he wanted me to learn about myself, how he made me, what he made me to do, but then also to realize that my mindset, my worldview growing up in deep East Texas is not the worldview of everyone else in the world. And there's things that I needed my worldview broadened. I needed to understand just things work differently in other parts of the world. And that's not a bad thing, that God has made this world and all the cultures. It's just a beautiful. The diversity is beautiful, and when sorry.
No, you're good.
He needed me to learn that there's not just one way, that there's not one way he's working, there's not one way he's doing church, there's not one way he's doing family, that there's many ways that he does that around the world, and to have my worldview broaden.
Yeah, that's really good. Yeah. What about you, Luke?
Yeah. So while Kate was being called out of East Texas for the sake of the gospel, I was being called out of East Texas for my own purpose. I was not a believer in high school. If you were to track our lives in parallel, they were headed in vastly different directions. Growing up the son of an immigrant dad, he was very direct in saying that, hey, you have 3 lines of work and you need to choose one of them. You can either be a doctor or a lawyer or an architect. And I was really scared of heights, so architecture went out the window, and I was really bad at arguing, as Kate can probably. I mean, we've been married 17 and a half, almost 18 years now, and I've determined that I'm not very good at arguments or winning arguments. And so I've known that for quite some time. That is not a revelation for me. But I did enjoy science. I was just captivated by everything, biology and chemistry. And so I was like, hey, I'll give the doctor thing a try. And so started to look into it more as a high schooler. And when you start to look into, doctors' salaries and the fame and the fortune and the possibility of houses and cars and things like this, even for me, like for the possibility of being renowned and having, at that time, I'm a teenage boy thinking I've got all this money, like I'm going to have a lot of women who are interested in me. And so my train was on a completely different track than Kate's. And so I went to college with no foundation whatsoever in Christ. And I met Kate. We had the same honors biology class, and I met her the first day of college. I actually didn't want to meet her. She was set a few rows behind me, and her and 2 or 3 other girls they made it their life mission, or at least that semester's mission, to crack the shell of the nut who was sitting in front of them, I think. And so we became friends. Yeah, I know. I mean, I know that's what you say now. But we became friends. We studied together, and I wanted so badly to make better grades than her, and it just never worked out. And so I decided, if I can't beat her, I'm just going to join her. And so I remember meeting Kate, and she loved Jesus and would invite me to these groups, these Bible studies, where people were actually like raising their hands, crying, praying, talking to Jesus as if he is there and present, which was something I had never experienced. And I thought it was really weird at first, but she would share Christ with me. Her and her roommate would share Christ with me. They'd be praying all the time, praying before meals, just praying before tests, and there was comfort that I found in that. And eventually, probably about a year and a half later, I'm sure they felt like they were beating their heads against the wall, trying to share the good news with me. Eventually, I did come to faith. And I remember reading the New Testament. It took me like a month and a half to read through the New Testament. I was just voraciously reading and feeling like I was on fire for whatever God would download into me. I was up for it. And one of the things, even before I became a believer, I was like, hey, I want to do maybe some Doctors Without Borders type work. But my motivation was so that I could put it on a CV, or that I would look better for people who are hiring, or so that people would think that I was generous. There were all these, looking back, dumb, immature motivations. But Christ when he captured my heart, he redeemed that into saying like, hey, I'm going to not only redeem you as a sinner, but I'm going to redeem your purpose in life and your motivation. And so he he downloaded a new motivation into me, which spurred off of, Matthew 28. It's the Great Commission. And so as much as I would like to say it was, God parted the heavens and God, there's this burning bush moment, if you will, it was more of like, hey, God's word says, and to go and to make disciples. So I want to go and make disciples. And I have a great platform in sharing through medical work and through a healing platform. And so things just came together, and we eventually, started dating and got married after that. And God just united our vision as wanting to go and serve overseas long term.
Yeah. So you both then went on short-term trips to get a feel for and to develop that sense of maybe this is something that is long-term. That'd be fair to say that both of you all did many of those?
Yes, we did. We went on several before we were dating and before we got married, but then also after we got married, we both had felt, even before we got married, I knew that this is something the Lord was asking of me. And so it was just beautiful to see the Lord. He'd already told me, he'd already given me a direction forward. But the fact that he also gave me a husband, a partner to do this with in the future was just really neat to see the Lord provide that for me, because I didn't know how I would have ever found that for myself. I didn't know where to go looking for a husband. So he provided that for me, and that we got to do it together and move forward together was obviously an awesome blessing.
Yeah, and regarding those short-term trips, like from human logic, it would have made sense that we would have trampoline from short-term trips in Latin America where we speak Spanish. I'm from Hispanic background, and we would just go to serve long-term in a Spanish-speaking place. And the Lord had other plans for us. And so being even called to Myanmar was for what we had planned, like if you want to call it our master plan, like it was not the master's plan at that time to have us go to Latin America. And even though everything made sense for us to go to Latin America, he called us to a different place with a different language, a different people, place we had really never even heard of. But short-term trips were definitely integral for us. They were very important for us in our development of, hey, during this 2-week or month-long trip, what worked, what didn't work, what did we see that was maybe a little bit cringy during a 2-week trip, what were things in which we felt like we connected very well with locals, and so we were able to take small principles from what we learned, and then from what, working alongside long-term workers on the field, just getting to pick their brains and see what they felt like was important for long-term sustainable work. That was really important for us in our development.
And it showed us to not only the principles of doing long-term mission work overseas, but who we are as people. The Lord has made each of us at Army Hill are unique, and we're given specific personalities and specific giftings or things we're good at. And we're not made the same. We're not supposed to be made the same. It'd be pretty boring if we were. No. But how did he make Luke, and how did he make Kate, and how does the Lord, with that design in mind, how does he want to plug us into his kingdom work? And so for Luke and I, that's not a lot of places. It wouldn't fit for us, but it would fit beautifully for someone else. And for where he's sending us, it wouldn't fit for other people, but man, it really fits for us. And so to learn who we are as people and how the Lord designed us, I think that's the time where he really showed us a lot about ourselves.
Yeah. So, Luke, fair to say, and you didn't go to medical school with the mission field in focus, but for Kate, for you, did you see this as something, I'm going to get this medical background and I'm going to have this so that I can use it overseas? Or did you go to college thinking of missions, or were you already on that track? Or what made you choose the medical route?
When I was in high school, I went on a trip with my dad to China, and we he had been several times before, my father had, and we'd even had some friends of ours from that country come over and stay in our home. And I just fell in love with the culture, the community, the people. And so my dad's final trip that he went on, I got to go with him. And it was the year after 7/11 or September 11th. The year after September 11th. And so it was scary. It was a scary time. People were still kind of scared to travel and do different things, but it was awesome. On that trip, however, we had a very near miss. Our plane just about crashed on our way to China. And starting from there, the Lord just started to show me, you take on risk when you do things. When we all have risk as humans. Like we're all facing risk every day. Sometimes we don't see it because it just becomes so normal. But stepping out in faith and doing anything to obey what the Lord has asked us to do, you are accepting a spiritual attack. The enemy doesn't want you to be a part of this. And so if he can stop it, distract it, destroy it, he will. And so we believe that he tried to do that on our trip. He damaged our plane and he tried to stop the trip, try to keep us from going, different things. And so, but we persisted. We had some good leadership and we made it there. And on that trip, I was with a group of doctors. This group of doctors used their because they had medical licenses, the government of that country said, everything's fair game. You can share whatever you want as long as you're coming to teach medicine in the hospitals, in these clinics. And so that was, to see that open door in a place where there usually is not an open door, was very influential on me. And then being in the village that we were in, there had been a patient that had died the week before because they didn't have an ultrasound to diagnose gallstones, which is a very thing to diagnose and to treat in the U.S., but in this place that wasn't available. And so for me to just see those basic needs that could be easily met with education and with equipment and with, something that wouldn't take years of training, that got me excited to see. I already loved medicine, but to be able to see how maybe I could be a part of that for a village in the future, or for a place in the future. So since then, I already knew I wanted to do, the Lord was asking me to consider overseas work. And then since that trip, it was like, this is where I'm headed. I thought he was calling me to China. The Lord showed me a different path later. But I think that trip was when I first developed just a true love for cross-cultural disciple making. I agree with what Luke said earlier. Just we're all called to make disciples wherever we are, but where is he asking you to go? Is he asking you to go across the street? Is he asking you to go to Nacogdoches? He's asking you to go to another state, or is it to another country? And he will make that clear over time, but it takes a lot of time. Yeah. So going to college, that was already my mindset, my goal. By the time we both got out of college, going into medical school, that was our goal. We got married that summer before we went, but we didn't know where. And so starting from that point when we got married and then heading into medical school and PA school, just constantly beseeching the Lord, asking him where would he send us. My argument was, Lord, don't you think you could tell me now so I could learn language? Yeah. Thinking that I could get ahead of the plan, which the Lord laughs at that, I think. I said and then I forgot what I was going to say.
Well, I think so. Help me understand. So you cracked the shell that was Luke, and you got through the shell. He was happy. He was going on medical mission trips to pad the resume. At what point did it change for you, Luke, to now I feel like, okay, this isn't just padding my resume. This might be the job that I'm going after.
Well, actually, the padding the resume was pre-Christ. Post-Christ, like within the first 3 to 6 months of my faith walk with him, was his, hey, there is no resume. Like all this gets burned up. So by the time we were going on short-term mission trips as a couple and leading short-term mission trips, in medical school and then residency after that, by that time, it was for me a preparation for long-term medical work. That was, and like I said, we had done Latin America and the Middle East and some other places like that. And I think through that, we learned some basic principles. You know, we learned that we wanted to go kind of like Paul talks about. We don't want to build on others' foundation. We wanted to do more of pioneering work into people groups and places that had not had the opportunity to hear the good news, unreached people groups, if you will, places that are harder to reach, even more remote, and places that we would be able to leverage our medical expertise into a platform to share the good news among those people. And so those were kind of some things we had learned over our time of doing short-term mission trips.
Okay. Yeah. So then as you got married that summer, it was how long from that summer until you actually left for Myanmar? What did that time?
Almost 10 years. Yep.
Okay. So so it wasn't like a quick,
No.
we got married and we're going overseas. It wasn't.
Yeah, we got
fast.
married. We got married late for East Texas standards. We were 21 when we got married, and
Wow, you waited a long time.
yeah, I know.
That's great.
I mean, true love waits, you know. But you know, we knew that we had 4 years of medical school. You know, we got married right out of college, and we had 4 years of medical school, 4 years of training, residency as well. So we knew we had at least 8 years ahead of us, and we had a mentor at that time who knew that our desire was we had the desire to go long-term overseas in some type of sustainable medical work among unreached people groups. He had seen and experienced a lot of students and residents who had gone into training, gone into school, saying, "Hey, we feel like we've been called to overseas in work long term," and he'd seen a lot of attrition. You know, I mean, you take 100. I mean, this is the estimate. You take 100 people, maybe 2 or 3 of them who actually professed they wanted to do this, felt like they had been called out to do this type of work. By the time they're done with 8 to 10 years of school and training, maybe 2 or 3 of them are still left at the end of all that, who are committed to doing long-term work. And it's hard. I mean, it's an uphill battle. You know, there's a lot of distraction in that journey. And so we had a mentor who said, "Hey, if this is truly what you're being called to, I've seen the attrition rate is so high," that his suggestion was, tell it to everybody. Tell it to people at your church that this is what you're called to. Tell it to people who will hold you accountable. This is what you're called to. So that when you get to the end of that pipeline and all the way through it, people are asking you, like, how are you making decisions in order to obey what the Lord has called you to do? So first year medical school, second year medical school, third year, fourth year. I mean, there are people around us asking, like, what kind of decisions are you making in order to equip and prepare yourself and in obedience to what the Lord has called you to do long-term overseas? And even through training, you know, part of our deciding where to go for training was selecting a residency program that's going to say, hey, we want to be able to equip you for anything that walks in the door in limited resource settings or whatnot. So we made even decisions based on where we were going training, based on how that's going to fit into what the Lord has called us to do. So there was that.
Well, so in that, what you're saying, Kate, is you were prepared from a young age. Your dad, you had gone with him on mission trips. You knew this is what I'm called to do. And you kind of chose a path of job and training to take you in a way that would open up doors to places that wouldn't otherwise be open. Luke, for you were going after what your dad said: be a doctor, be a lawyer, be an architect. Architect's off. I'm afraid of heights too, but you still have to go on airplanes to get places. So there is heights involved. It doesn't feel like that when you're in a metal tube.
I toyed with the idea of just building 1-story buildings. But I don't think that practice would go over very well.
Probably not. But what I hear in that is sometimes you're called at an early age and you go on a track and you know what you're doing, and it takes years and years to get there, but you've got that calling. Sometimes God is preparing you and you don't even know who he's preparing. You're not even a believer yet. You don't have any understanding of Christ, but you're getting medical school, and you can use those skills and passions and character that the Lord has given you, because we're all different, to use for his glory once he does make it clear. So
Yes.
all calling is not the same.
Yeah.
But when you guys got married, and over that 10 years, or maybe even before you were married, how did he begin to shape you guys to know, okay, I've called you to long-term service together?
Mm.
And I guess what I'm trying to do is to demystify this idea that we have of calling. So sometimes there is a burning bush moment. Sometimes there is seeing the Lord on the road as Saul and becoming Paul, but those are kind of the exception and not the rule. And those do happen. But how did you know I'm called to long-term service? Because there are others who might be called to short-term and to working here in America, but going as they have, as they're able. How do you tell the difference, I guess, in those callings?
I think we both had I won't say suspicion, a idea that the Lord was, even before we got married, we had agreed together that we felt like that was the direction he was asking us to go. But we didn't know how to go. We didn't know how to move forward. We don't know what that looks like. And then just with different countries over the course of those 10 years, countries at the beginning of that were open, and places that we could have chosen to go at the end of the 10 years, you can't. And so even just seeing just the landscape of the world change and how missions has to look change. So we didn't even know how to go forward. So we had this idea, again, we just didn't know how to move forward. But what the Lord has taught me, I think both of us, we're both type A people, we like to plan, is that he broke our ability to make plans that are going to actually, so we're trying to make the plans, Luke and I would try to, say, oh, here's our 10-year plan, here's how we're going to get there. And it never works like that. And to reveal to us that the Lord is the one that establishes our way. We can make good plans. We can make good decisions based on what we know or what we've experienced, but the Lord is going to prepare the way forward. And so what we've come, I think at the end of that 10 years, looking back, what he really taught us is just do the next thing. Do the next thing that have I showed you the next step? Then just do that with all you have. Do that excellently to the best of your ability. And then I'm going to show you the next thing. So you may not have the next 5 years planned out. You may not even know fully what the next step is going to look like, but have I told you something to do, then go for it. And then as you're going to obey, the Lord has always, for us, he's shown us as we're going, then he shows us the next thing and then the next thing. And so again, that for us, he took us on the path of, we took multiple short-term trips during the course of those 10 years. We were looking for a place to prepare to go. We were looking for that country so we could start learning the language or get everything set up or make the connections during those 10 years. But he chose to not allow that to happen. He chose to make us wait for 10 years before he told us that it was going to be to Myanmar that he was going to call us. And for us, that's what he wanted, because he wanted to teach us the value of trusting in him, of not being anxious, of not trying to manipulate or micromanage everything into being, but just to trust that he's got everything. He's sovereign over everything, and he's going to get us to where he wants us if we're going to be faithful to obey, to be obedient to the next thing.
Yeah. And we commit ourselves to the Lord. We say, Lord, I will follow you wherever you go. And there's not really a caveat to that. I am not committing to serving the Lord within a specific time frame. I'm just saying, Lord, if you send me overseas to Myanmar, to China, to Guatemala, wherever the place is, I will serve you as long as you have me there. And, short term, intermediate term, long term, I don't really know definitionally if anybody agrees on what that means. From months and years, that type of time frame. So we just went saying, we will go as long as you would have us serving among this people group, as long as you have us being effective. And the important thing was, we weren't going saying like, hey, Lord, come with us. We were saying, Lord, we know you're there, and we just want to join you in the work for however long you allow us to be within that work. So yeah, we committed, and our desire was long-term overseas medical platformed gospel sharing. but we were really just saying we are open for you to use us as long as you want us to. So, yeah, I think short-term trips, and if you want to define that anywhere within a week to a month, they're very good and they're very important. I disagree with people who would dog on short-term mission trips and their efficacy. The Lord uses those trips to work in the long-term work and in the people who are going on those trips' lives. But for us, I think the important thing was we had committed to the Lord, and we had committed and said, we will go for as long as you would use us, Lord.
Yeah.
I think a story it just comes to mind right now, and it's something that's been significant to both of us, even the night you believed, is the story of the Israelites. And not just the 40 years, but even before the 40 years, when they got out of Egypt and they're going up to Canaan the first time, he didn't take them on a beeline route because who was sitting there waiting? It was a big people group with lots of soldiers and armies, and they wouldn't have been able to pass through or to overcome those armies that were in the way. The Lord took them by this roundabout route around the wilderness to get to the promised land, and then even the 40 years later, because of the sin of the Israelites. But in both of those seasons, it looks like, God, you're not being effective. Can you just go from point A to point B directly? And that was my mindset. He told me what I was supposed to do when I was 15. Let's get on with it. But the goodness of the Lord, the kindness of the Lord knows that we need preparation. And there's things that we need to learn about ourselves, about the people that we're working with. So if that's a team that you're working with, if that's your husband, if that's your family, if that's a people group you're going to serve with, there's things that we need to learn. And we don't even know how to prepare ourselves for what he's about to ask us to do. Because I know in our story, how many times is he thrown in a curveball and everything changed overnight? Several times. Yeah. And so he knows what's coming, and only he knows what we're going to need to prepare for that. And so as we feel like we're wandering around aimlessly, that's not true. Commit our way to the Lord. I had to learn to just commit my way to the Lord, even if it doesn't make sense, even if it seems like it's taking longer than necessary. There's a purpose in it. And trust, again, just trust the next thing he's asking you to do. And then he's going to reveal after that what's coming. So whether you do know, or you feel like you know that he's calling you specifically to missions or to ministry, great. If you don't know, but he's just leading you in a direction that doesn't necessarily make sense, just go with him, and he will reveal over time what it is that he's asking of you. And you're going to be able to look back and be like, oh, that's why I needed that. Because of his kindness, he'll do that for us.
Yeah, the horse is made ready for battle, but the victory belongs to the Lord. There's preparation that takes place, and there's responsibilities that we have, but it's the Lord's. It's all the Lord's anyway. Well,
it's obedience to the next thing that God's called you to. We all know what God has called believers to be about, who he's called us to be, who he's called us to be about among us. And we're perfectly positioned here in East Texas, so close to Houston, with so many unreached people groups right here that people can be involved here. And it can be preparatory for what God may call them to in the future. But knowing who we are and what we're to be about is the step of obedience that you guys are talking about. And sometimes we don't even know we're being prepared for what God has for us in the future. That's I think that's really helpful for helping people understand their calling as a believer. That's the calling of all of us. So why then Myanmar? How did you land on, okay, it's Myanmar and it's now?
I think some of those things we still have on a long list of questions we have for the Lord when we get to heaven. Just like, hey, I feel like I have a whole clipboard of questions. Like, hey, why did you do that, Lord? I'll say this: the Lord brought people into our lives, very good friends into our lives who had served in Myanmar for a while. And I mentioned earlier, we were looking to do more pioneering work among unreached people groups in places and among people who just had never heard the good news, and that was a passion that we had. And these friends were forming a group, a new team to explore strange new worlds. It sounds like Star Trek, to explore an area of northeastern Myanmar that was unreached, had multiple unreached people groups, was remote. There was an opportunity to do some medical work. And like I said, yeah, it was a pioneering new team. And so we took a vision trip. We took a vision trip in early or mid 2014 and went with this couple who are good friends. And just kind of, I mean, we laid the fleece out for the Lord, before the Lord, and just said, like, Lord, if this is where you want us to be, then give us kind of this supernatural, if you will, if it is your will, give us a supernatural peace when we get to the place where you want us to be. Show us what that Luke 10 person of peace would look like. Show us what a possible medical ministry would look like here in this town. And just give us your love for the people in this place that you would call us towards. And so during that short-term vision trip, we first went to a very large city in Myanmar, and we're small town people. I mean, it was intimidating, just bustling with cars and people. There was coffee shops. I mean, there was even a mall. There was all of these things which, could be attractive to some people, but for us, it just
couldn't see them. There's too many crowds.
Yeah, for us, we just did not like it, and we felt like the Lord was saying, "This is not the place." And so, after a few days in the big city, we took a overnight bus about 14 hours up country, got off in this small podunk town, smaller than Lufkin, Texas, by large standards, or by a large gap. And once we stepped off the bus into this smelly, dark, muggy, hot village
At 4 in the morning.
At 4 in the morning, we felt like the Lord was like, "This is it. This is where you're going to be." And for the next 3 or 4 days after that, we just, kept petitioning the Lord, like, "Hey, are you sure this is where you want us to be?" And he'd show us what a person of peace looks like. He'd introduce us to someone who was open and listened to the gospel, who wanted to open up their oikos, their group of people, or their family to hear the good news as well. People who were talking about what medical ministry would look like in their village, people who were inviting, and again, just gave us a love for the people and the place that ultimately we did move to. So it wasn't, sky opening and revelational, but there was a piece that really did not fit into human understanding. Like this, nothing made sense about this little podunk place for us to go there. But obviously we've been there 8 years and the Lord's done great things there.
Yeah. So a couple of words to unpack there that you've said. One, unreached people group. What does that mean? We've said this, we said in the previous ones, but a good chance to revisit. What is an unreached people group? Are there unreached people groups in Lufkin, Texas? Or what is an unreached people group?
An unreached people group generally, and I don't remember the percentage, I want to say it's less than 1%, have had the opportunity to hear the good news of Jesus Christ. So people who grew up in situations, cultures, places where they may go their entire lives and never hear the name of Jesus Christ. They may not even have access to internet. They may not have access to media resources. So these are places that are often remote, often linguistically isolated or geopolitically isolated, or because of religion, other religions are very isolated, and people don't have the opportunity to hear the good news. Yep.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So different than lost. Yes. Unreached is someone who, as David Platt says a lot, would be born, live, and die, and never have an opportunity to hear the gospel. So usually we're talking about the arbitrary number that's assigned to it is less than 2% Christian. I don't know why 2%, but that's generally what we refer to. There's a lot of missiology behind that, and we could go into that. We don't have time to go into that, but basically we're talking about people who don't have the gospel. And so you all felt a burden for the unreached.
Yes.
Yeah.
There are many who feel a burden for the lost here in
Yes.
America, and that is something that God calls them to.
Yes.
And it's a worthy calling, but your specific calling was to the unreached. You got to Myanmar, you got to this big city, and you thought, this is not who I am. This is not what God's calling me to. That was just kind of felt. And so you got to your eventual place of ministry. You got off the bus at 4 a.m. and you just said, yep, here it is. And that is what it is. And I've experienced that myself too. I know that others that I've talked to, that it's just something you have to experience. It's not something we can necessarily explain in a podcast like this, but you get that from taking a step of obedience, like you said, taking the next step, and God will make it clear in his timing. I was going to recommend a book, and I don't know if you all have read this book or not. You can recommend other books if there's other books you would recommend, but there's a book by Kevin DeYoung called Just Do Something, where he talks about our ability as believers to sometimes mystify calling and think, well, yeah, I know that that's what God's called me to do as a believer, but I'm just going to pray about that. And that's good. We're not downgrading prayer, and you should pray over things, but sometimes we use it as an excuse to just sit and not do because we're scared, because it's not clear enough, that we're not willing to take the next step. Are there other things that you guys have read, places that you went for training that helped you to overcome that fear of, okay, God, you could just make this clear to me now, but you're not. So I'm just going to take that next step. Is there something you would recommend to people who are thinking through that?
Trying to remember books that helped me. I can't think of a book right now. I'll think about it. I did get some advice, and I don't know if I'm sure someone would argue with me about this, but it was very meaningful to me as someone who likes to be active and has trouble being still. But they were just reminding me that, and I've found this true in my life, is that whenever I'm moving with faith, trying to obey whatever it is the Lord has asked of me, so moving obediently, not just doing whatever I want, but moving in obedience, that's been the times where I've heard God's voice the clearest. He's redirected, or he's, as I'm going, showed this, stop here, talk to her, she's important. But when I'm just sitting at home, maybe just praying, or just, which again is so important, but we don't just sit there all day and not be ready to also do good work. I mean, and James says faith without works is dead. And so, but it's been when I've been active with the Lord, when I've been faithfully trying to obey, is when I've been able to hear his voice the clearest, to go there, go here, turn back, stop here. So to just keep doing, and sometimes he calls us to be still and to wait on him. And that's being obedient.
Yeah.
But to not just be passive about it. I don't know if that makes sense or not.
It does.
Yeah.
Would you add any books?
I mean, there's quite a number of books out there. I feel like that, I'm not going to vouch for them as if they are, infallible and that the authors are perfect. But I mean, the Insanity of God and Insanity of Obedience, that couplet of books is really good. Was really spurring for my faith, and just taking out of that, like, hey, what am I going to be obedient to today? Because there is, John 14, Christ says, if you love me, you will obey my commandments. And so there is obedience. It is rooted out of love and not out of fear of what the Lord is going to do as consequence to disobedience, but it's rooted out of a love that he is worthy to be obeyed. And so those two books were great. Miraculous Movements was one of those books that, was
spurring.
Yeah, it was spurring to me. Just gave me, I don't know, a pot. It gave me hope that, hey, the Lord is at work and he is doing something, and he is doing it in his timing. And it kind of did, because I did, my early faith was, I don't know, I would say it was quite, narrow in what I perceived the Lord was capable of doing. And then just hearing stories and seeing how the Lord is moving, even in some people, whether it be visions and dreams, even doing things like that was just the first time. For some reason, that was the first time that I connected that the Lord is still at work in ways that I don't even understand and that I can't even measure and gauge. And Miraculous Movements was a great one.
And he doesn't need us. He's working
He works
before we get there, and he's just inviting us to come and join him.
Yeah.
I think that the Miraculous Movements for me was just that reminder of, man, he's doing awesome things around the world, and he's inviting us to just be a part of it.
And that's our prayer a lot of times, is like, Lord, do something in us and through us, and then also just do things despite us, despite our limitations and our imperfections. Just do something despite us. But those were just really encouraging books. The 3D Gospel is another one that we really enjoyed, that helped us to understand, hey, the gospel, from a Western Southern United States, Deep South culture, the things that resonate in the good news of Jesus Christ, our sins are forgiven. And the shame of that is taken away. The guilt of that is taken away. Those things really resonate with us, and that's a powerful message within the good news of Christ. There is also a powerful message within the good news of Christ for other cultures, and they resonate. Still, it is their sins being forgiven, but now they have power. They have an indwelt spirit that gives them power over sin and death and over temptation through the good news of Christ. And so there are different facets of different cultures that resonate with different aspects of the good news of the kingdom of God. And that was a great book in helping us just to realize, because we work in all three of those cultures in our setting, and we're not changing the gospel. We are just looking at it from a different angle so that we can present it to different people and meet them where they are.
Yeah, that's good. I think all those books are excellent. The ones that I've read, I haven't read Ministry with Movements.
Miraculous Movements.
Miraculous Movements. I haven't read that one, but the others are great. And I think missionary biographies are super helpful to see what other missionaries have run into. That's why we're doing this podcast, because this is a missionary biography. I mean, these are things that you guys are doing. So going back to you guys land on Myanmar, like this is where God has called us.
Yes.
You are preparing with Harmony Hill, with Restore, like your sending organization to go, and you're going through all of this to get ready for learning things like 3D Gospel. I mean, we could spend a whole podcast on understanding cultures from that, and maybe we will at some point. There's a lot there, and I think there could be a lot more places to dig in. But thank you guys for sitting down, for talking. Thank you, Luke and Kate, for talking to me. This has been an episode of our Harvest podcast. If you find this helpful, or even if you don't find it helpful, if you could like it, share it across social media, if you could tell people by word of mouth so that people know about it, it's really helpful for people who are thinking about missions, for people like Luke who don't know that God's preparing them to go, for people who are preparing for short term or thinking through calling. All of these are helpful, and you can help us to get this into the ears of the people who need to hear it by liking and subscribing to this podcast. So thank you for listening. We hope this has been helpful, and we hope that you will take what you've heard and continue to pray for the work happening throughout the world, but especially in Myanmar, and for Luke and Kate and their kiddos as they prepare for the next chapter of what God has already prepared beforehand for you to walk in it. So thank you for listening, and have a great day.